Hi, everybody. So, as Gosha said, my name is Patrick Bosek. I work for Jorsek. Many of you may know us as DITA. Today, I want to talk to you about some of the problems that you'll run into, some of the things you'll solve, and some of the things you'll create when you look to transition to a DITA structure. So, my presentation is primarily oriented for people who are not in DITA yet, but are considering it. So probably coming from some type of desktop publishing. There's a number of different tools out there. You know, they range from help authoring tools to Microsoft Word to things like that. But I also think that most of the things that I'm going to say today could be a reevaluation for people who've gone through a DITA implementation and are maybe a year or two or even longer into one. And it's a time to think about where that's gone and how that's worked and all those types of things. So before I actually jump into the problems, I want to start by providing you some of my perspective on this. I want to frame this conversation a little bit. So when I think about what DITA means and moving to DITA and those types of things, I think about it as being a really fundamental change in an organization. And I see a lot of people who are going through this process and they're looking at it as a tools change. They're saying, okay, we used to use these tools, and now we're going to use these tools. And I think that really understates the entire proposition in a big way. I think it understates the problems that you can solve with it. So I think it really devalues the amount of change you're going through. And I think it doesn't put enough precedent on what it is that you may create when you go through this process. So instead of thinking about this as an incremental change or an evolutionary change in our tool sets, I want to try to convince you that the things you run into are more akin to a revolutionary change. So when you're going and you're moving from a desktop publishing type of methodology and you're going to an open standard, single-sourced DITA implementation, I think it looks more like a revolutionary change in your work. So the way that I define a revolution in human productivity is it's a major advance in production capacity that foundationally changes capability. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind because it's not just that you're becoming more efficient or you're saving money or whatever those things may be. Good DITA implementations, good implementations of structured content, those things, they provide entirely new capabilities. They really change the game. And some of that's because you have a lot more capacity to do new things, so you're not spending as much time on what you have to get done, so you have more things you're able to start doing. And some of them are because there's fundamental differences in the technology. So another way that I think about this is an evolutionary improvement is going to be, just continued improvement, hopefully. Where revolutionary improvement has this other characteristic to it. So you've got this inflection point here where things change dramatically. And this is really true of every single human revolution in human production in history. There's always something that happens and processes change, methods of doing things change, and the amount of production capacity you have really, really jumps. So, I think the most obvious example we think of is like the Industrial Revolution. Things changed. It looks basically like this when you look it up. And at this point, what happened here was we reframed the way we did things and we introduced a lot more automation. And that's true in the agricultural revolution. It's true in the information revolution. It's true in all these revolutions that we see throughout human history where groups of individuals have gone and they've really redefined what they've done. From the perspective of how they do their work and what they can produce. So as I was kind of looking into this, I stumbled on the Wikipedia page for automation, and I love these main advantages that are in here because they read just like a business case for DITA. So this is actually copied right out of the Wikipedia page. Increased productivity, improved quality, improved consistency. I don't actually know why consistency is up there twice, but I didn't write this, so. And then reduce the overall human labor costs and expenses. The disadvantages look a lot like, again, copied from Wikipedia, what we think of as being major stumbling blocks for implementing DITA as well. So you have basically high implementation costs, high initial costs, uncertainty in the implementation, And the one thing that I will add in here is that I think that there's a lot of emotional aspects to this people as well as they're going through this process. So why I'm bringing this up is because when you start to look at the problems that you're attacking and the problems that you're creating, I want you to kind of think of this as your own little industrial content revolution. You're really changing the way you do things. You're really going and attacking these problems that you have on a day-to-day basis in a different way, and that in and of itself is going to create some problems. So before I get into the actual problems that I've outlined, I just want to talk a little bit about the methodology I'm going to use. So basically what I've done is I have about 4.5 problems, and I've broken them down into the opportunities that are created in this kind of idea of the problem that I'm talking about, and the risks that are created inside of that as well. And we just very simply want to reduce risk and improve the opportunities inside of these problems. So, first problem, cost. I think this is the problem that everybody is trying to solve, and maybe the biggest hurdle to actually doing one of these implementations in most cases. So I think it's natural that it's the first thing that we talk about. So when you're looking at costs, your opportunities are what you'd expect. It's the ability to significantly reduce long-term cost. Localization cost is inside of that, but I think that for a lot of people, this is such a big bullet, it's worth calling out on its own. And then there's this other method of improving cost, which is cost suppression as opposed to reduction. And I want to talk a little more about that in a second. The risks inside of costs are your implementation costs. Obviously, it's going to cost money, it's investment to go through one of these processes. There's a risk to working with legacy content. So it's very common when an organization is going through this that they, if they've been around for any amount of time, they have content, and some of that's going to get converted and some of it isn't. So there's always this decision on how much are we going to spend on going and migrating our legacy content. And I think a lot of times, that poses a risk because people want to say, well, we don't really use this anymore. But I know that there are a lot of organizations we work with that's been a continual drag on their business, not having really gone through and done enough conversion up front. And then finally, there's the fear of the impact that comes with the shifting costs. So back to that reduction versus suppression. So these are two very different things. Cost reduction is the idea that we want to produce what we're producing today at a lower cost. Cost suppression is the idea that we have more things that we need to do, and we don't want to raise our costs to do those things. And these are fundamentally different in the way they interact with your team. So one of the things that I'm going to harp on throughout the course of this talk is how this feels to the people who are involved with it, like how we have to deal with the interpersonal issues and the team and the things that come up when people see these big changes coming. So I think really being aware and being open and honest about whether or not we're trying to reduce costs or we're trying to suppress it is important because it really frames the whole conversation. In a cost reduction situation, that can create some fear in people. People realize that they're part of the cost. They're part of that cost that you might be trying to reduce. But in a cost suppression situation, I don't know if I just said the same word over again. I meant reduction the first time if I said suppression. In a cost suppression situation, people realize that there's more is being asked of them, and to rise to that challenge, they need to do things a new way. And I think that really is emotionally different. So this is one of the things that I feel is important to talk about. Also, are we trying to reduce internal or external cost? So one of the reasons that I pulled the localization out of just general long-term cost reduction is because nobody's ever cried about spending less money at a localization provider. That's an external cost. That's one of those things that it's always a win to reduce localization costs because, at the very least, it's super easy to plow that budget back into localizing to more languages, which is, probably good for customers. Internal cost is the people working there, is the processes there. So when you're looking at how you're analyzing your cost, be it suppression or reduction, I think really being aware of the things that you're looking at and really being open with your people about what those are is really important. So these are some of the things that I look at around cost. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do a little bit of an ROI. And I'm not doing this because I care about the numbers on this ROI. I'm doing this because I think that this is one of the really important things to do when you're looking at the overall cost of the project. And it's not because I think you need to justify an ROI in all cases. It's not because I think it's going to be right. It's because what it does is it frames the things that you're looking at and it gives you the targets that you're shooting at. So taking a look at this, we have costs and resources, authors, how much they cost, we've got reviewers, we've got cost of translation. So this kind of breaks down the total cost of document production here. You may have some other costs in here inside of the human resources or the services resources. This is obviously not an exhaustive list, but it's an example. We have the cost of the actual DITA implementation. So this is what you're going to spend to implement this new way of doing things. It's what you're going to spend on your own little revolution. Again, these numbers are not all that important. I think there's a lot of things that could be added here or taken away. But what you'll notice here is you're really outlining what it is you're spending money on. And I think it's really important to notice that we have the cost of consulting in here, that we're spending money on that, and it's a pretty significant amount of money. So then we have our opportunities for savings. So this breaks down the things that we're shooting at. I think these are the really important numbers. Because when you look at these are the things that we're trying to improve. So when you put it down in black and white, it means you can have a real conversation about this stuff. You can really talk about the value. This block here, these X number of things for your organization, these are the things that you can have a conversation about with anybody in the company. Everybody understands reducing one of these, improving one of these, having one of these things come out better, because what you're really talking about is you're talking about value, and you're talking about it in a common language, which is just the amount of money that you spend on getting that value. So again, planning is indispensable. Plans are useless. I think that's an Eisenhower quote. But the point is that you need to do this so you know exactly where you're going, what you're targeting. Not so much because you need it to actually be right when it gets to the end of this. And here's the, fake numbers as they total out. Okay, so optimizing cost. So know your targets, know what you're shooting at. Really think about the things that you want to get done and what those things look like, and put them down in black and white. They don't have to be right, but if you commit to them, it at least gives you a goal that you're trying to achieve. Think long term. These revolutions, these implementations, these changes, they're not 3-month changes. They're not 6-month changes. Anybody who's really gone into a DITA implementation will tell you that it's an ongoing project. It's something you work at over time. And for those of you who've been in one, I think it's often easier to just think about the near past as opposed to the long-term past as well. So I think it's easy to forget where you were. And I think that when you're going through and you're looking at the costs and the processes you've done, when you look back, you need to look back in a longer term as well. You got to be really ready for the upfront investment. Again, I showed a spreadsheet here because I think it's important to understand that as you're going through, investment really makes a difference. And that's going to come up in our next section as well. And finally, be honest. When you're talking about this with your people, if it's cost reduction and it's primarily internal cost reduction, have that conversation. People will respect the honesty there. At least it's something that they know you're going after. If that's not the case, if you're really looking at cost suppression and you're looking at doing a lot more, be honest about that too. I think having those plans and socializing them make a really big difference. Okay, so the other side of this is the efficiency. Cost and efficiency are very closely correlated, obviously. And efficiency naturally is one of those things where we're just thinking this is all upside, right? Like there's no such thing as bad efficiency, right? So why is this even being listed here? Well, efficiency actually comes with a bit of a downside because we don't get it for free. When you put in new systems, primarily automated systems, you always need more skilled managers and practitioners across the board. When you went from automation inside of making shoes, you needed people who are going to be more skilled, working together, more collaborative, more management. There has to be more structure. I mean, it's the same in this particular situation. So we've got a quote here this is one from one of our customers. Actually, I've got a number of quotes and examples that are about to come in from customers. Everything's anonymized. just figured out through the course of conversation it was a lot easier to do that for this presentation. So that's why there's no names on these. But the notion here is that when they first implemented this, and this is actually this is a very successful case, and even they didn't spend enough time talking to their authors about how this was going to change their workflow. And they've bumped into it as they've gone along. Now they've done a good job of fixing that as it's come up, but if they had looked at this more immediately and they had looked at what the downside of this new efficiency was going to be. We're reusing content. We've got 50% reuse. That's huge gains in efficiency, but we have to teach that to our people. They have to be aware that that's there. They need to be more skilled now that that's a thing that they're doing. The upside, it's an increase in capacity. I mean, duh, right? So this curve is the curve that I think is the most important thing to think about when you're looking at efficiency. And what this is this is your capacity to produce something, in this case, probably content. And the blue line it's you effectively, it's your capacity, and it's over time. And this green line is what you're expected to do. And so, I think for most of us, we're at 100% utilization, generally speaking. Anybody here got a bunch of extra time? We got one guy right there. He's presenting later, so his presentation better be awesome. So all of us still have to get to this green line. We still have to do this work, right? This doesn't go away. But the reality is that we don't have the same capacity when we're beginning this implementation. We have this dip, and this dip is for a number of reasons. One is because it takes cycles, it takes resources, it takes time to simply stand up the technology for the efficiencies we're looking to gain in the future. And the other aspect of it is we're not going to be as efficient immediately because we don't know how to use it. And even with the best training, it takes time to really get in there and to understand how we're going to be doing things now. New processes take some time to learn. So what do we do during this dip? How do we manage this? I think the first thing is we recognize that it's there. So I cannot tell you how often it is that I'm getting on a call and we get through, okay, got the problem outlined, makes a lot of sense, this looks like a good idea, I think you should probably do this, DITA looks like a good fit for you, et cetera. And then we're like, okay, so how does this going to impact your timelines over the course of the next year? Oh, well, what do you mean it's not? Okay. It is. It's going to. Like you can go and you can tell management, you can tell your whoever's above you, or you can tell yourself and your team that you're going to get the same things done, but you're not. It's not going to happen. There's going to be bumps along the way, and you don't want to burn your people out and kill them in that process. So again, being honest and being realistic about the fact that this is how this works is really important. And then on the other side of this, now we've got, is this a laser? It is a laser. We've got this whole big area here that we have as extra capacity. So what are we going to do with this? We need to talk about this before we get to this point. Because if we get to this point and we don't know what we're going to do with this, guess what's going to happen? We're just going to reduce the total headcount. We're going to reduce the total resources. So this whole thing just falls back down onto this green line. And when I really think about this, I don't think that's a great situation because I like to think about what would a customer want us to do? Most of the time, a customer doesn't want us to just keep doing what we've done and reduce the internal cost. Internal cost is a known quantity. We know exactly how much is there, but there is so much upside here. There is so much increased capacity and capability and possibility here that we can use to better serve the people we work with. And if you're in a highly technical organization with a B2B product or something that needs that type of content, your customers always want more knowledge, better knowledge, even if it's just delivered in a different way, delivered as an LMS as opposed to delivered as static PDFs. That's providing more value to them. And I think that is the type of thing that we need to be thinking about before we get to this inflection point. Okay, so run through a quick example now. So GMI is not the name of this company. There is a company named GMI. I think they're in like Dakota or something. So a little bit of background on this organization. They are an industrial manufacturer. They make big blocky metal stuff that does stuff. So not exactly this, whatever this is. But at any rate, that's what they do. And they sell this in a lot of places around the world, so they have to localize it. So before they moved to DITA, it took them 5 weeks to get one new language for their content. After moving to DITA, once their process was fully implemented, once they hit that point in the curve, they're down to 4 languages in 2 weeks. So my math might be wrong on this, but I come out with a 900% improvement in process on that. That's a huge upside. It really fundamentally changed their business. This is not an evolutionary improvement. This is a revolutionary improvement. This is fundamentally different. That's like taking your team and multiplying it by 10 almost. You have that much more resources that you can do other things with, you can provide more value with. This is another example. So before DITA, they had two new products come out, 2 new manuals, and it took them 9 weeks to turn around those 2 new manuals. After the DITA implementation, they had 3 new products and 4 new models that came out. There's a lot of reuse in their machines and thus their content. And it took them 3 weeks to do this. So a slightly different number, but that's still a 500% improvement in process. So they've got numbers like this all across the board. And they all have these, multiple 100% improvements in process that happen here. And I think that, this is a great example of just how big this can be for an organization. This really changed the game in terms of what they were able to do. And for them, content really is sales, because without the content in the language, they can't sell into that country. So if they have a blocker in their ability to deliver this content, they have a blocker in the ability to sell their machines. So it's important. So how do they do this? I wish I had something really interesting or profound to say here, but I don't. And maybe that's the part of that is profound. The reality is they just did it right. All they did was they went and they had a plan. They went out, they got consultants to work with them and think about this process. They knew that they were going to have that initial dip in the curve. They planned for it. They extended their timelines around it. They used the consultant to mitigate some of those things. They invested properly in their consultant. Something I'm going to talk about in a minute. They slightly redefined how they were going to deliver content, what it was going to look like. And in the end, they came out the other side with these improvements just because they planned properly and just because they went through the process and they didn't try to rush it. And everybody was happy going through it because they all knew what they were doing and they're all on the same page. And nobody was sitting there thinking, oh man, am I going to get fired when we're done with this? Because they had an open conversation about what that meant and what they were really shooting at. And that makes a huge difference. So, optimizing efficiency. Know your targets. Back to that ROI calculation. Know what you're shooting at. Prepare for that dip. And you're going to need to do things to mitigate that dip. For one, you should probably bring your production down a little bit. You should be aware of that. But 2, you can go and you can invest in consulting. You can invest in additional effort and labor to bring that up. There are things you can do. You should talk to people who have gone through this, who have seen similar things in your industry and the way that you produce content, and they can help you with some of their experiences. Even if they didn't do it right, oftentimes the failure to do something is better learning than the actual good execution of it. Hire consultants for that dip. But on the other side of it too, they're the ones that really set you up for the biggest upswing when you come out of it. Because the people that have gone through this and continually go through this, they're the ones that are going to have perspective that not only has more background in all of this, because it's what they do continually, but they're able to come in with a fresh perspective on your processes in your business and those types of things. And just having a fresh set of eyes on things can really make a huge difference in the overall quality of the implementation. Okay. So my third problem is redefinition. So one of the things that, going back to my initial analogy on human production revolutions, that I think works really well here too, is the idea that when you had the agricultural revolution, you had a lot less farmers. Now you had people in factories. Now that we're going through a robotics revolution, we've got a lot less people in factories. We've got a lot more programmers. So in your little mini revolution that you're going to go through, the type of people that are working inside of your content organization is going to be different on the other end. And this is an opportunity to increase the overall skill of your organization. When you bring in people who are more diverse and have new ideas, as I'm sure we're all aware, it's kind of the idea of this conference, right? You know, we're going to have a diverse content conference where we've got developers and we've got tech writers, we've got design people, and we all get together and we all come out with better things. It improves the overall capability of the organization. So that there really is a big opportunity here for a stronger group because that group is more diverse. And also you can have a better process. You can really change process in this whole thing. It can be less stressful. It can be more predictable. It can be something that's more reliable. And I think that can be a big change in people's lives. So I think the risks in redefining who's in your organization are pretty obvious here. This can be hard on people to learn new skills. Some people don't want to do that. So you have lack of understanding. People have skill gaps that need to be fixed. And again, this is something that we need to plan for. So as we're thinking about this, not only do we need to think about what our tool implementation is going to look like when we get through this process, we need to think about what our human resource implementation is going to look like. And we need to have those conversations with our people. So this is a quote from actually the next anonymized company that I'm going to do an example from too. But basically what they're saying here is that they planned for this as well. Ironically, I think they used the same consulting firm as the first example, now that I'm thinking about it. But they also did a good deal of planning, and even they weren't ready. That it was going to be such a big change in workflow and mindset. So they got to the other side of this, and having done everything right, it still wasn't quite enough. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't try. What it means is that you should maybe just overestimate a little bit. You should really be prepared to invest in that training and all those conversations. So let's take a look at this organization. What do they do? Bluesoft, again, not their name. There is a Bluesoft. It's not them. So they are a software company. They have a highly technical product. It is a product that is delivered to a lot of audiences, and that will be important in just a minute. So before DITA, what they were basically set up to do is they had videos that their instructional designers created, and they had help content that their customer service people created, and they didn't really talk to each other. So, the truth to whatever was going on in the product was somewhere in between oftentimes. And their documentation department, those are their quotes, not mine, were 5 people who just edited content from the customer services people. So, I think that looks like your very traditional customer service wiki paradigm, which is effectively what they were doing. I would argue that's not a great way of doing things, and I think when we look at what they accomplished, that the proof is in the pudding on this one. After this is what their organization looked like. Look how diverse this is. This is all full-time staff. This is awesome, I love this. They've got an information architect, 2 content architects. That's a different thing. I didn't even know that. So I wouldn't even know to tell you the difference in those 2 things. Although, I will give myself this credit, I guessed right when I was on the phone. 3 editors, 3 editor interns, 2 instructional designers, 2 instructional designer interns, 6 technical writers, 6 technical writer interns, 2 content technicians, 1 administrative assistant, managers, and a bunch of SMEs. Think about the different ideas that will come into that organization because they have all these different people working on this. And everybody's got their own discrete jobs. The only people that are writing in this are these guys. That's not even the majority of the people. Think about being in a documentation department where the majority of the people are not writers. How cool is that? That's really, really cool. So what did this do for them? So before they went to DITA, this is effectively what they did. There's no animations. There's not more bullets coming. This is what they did. They just managed help content produced by support. After DITA, they published to 3 different varieties of PDF, 2 different web systems. One of them is kind of a presentation wiki-ish type system. One of them is Moodle, which is an open source LMS. 3 different variations of their product and 7 different audiences. So these numbers don't work out exact, but when you combine all these things together, it's 42 discrete outputs. And they have, depending on how you calculate reuse, some thousands of percents of reuse, whoever's method you're using. And this is growing. There are going to be over 300 discrete outputs in the next 18 months. They're serving a vastly different set of users who are all getting their own specific content in their own specific channel in the way that they need to get it. And this has been huge for them. Because their product is technical, they really strongly rely on their end user being knowledgeable and being capable with their product. So when you think about this improvement in efficiency and you think about what would our customer want, this is what your customer wants. What they want is they want you to make this investment, because what this is really saying when you go and you produce the content that they need through learning, through their own variations, improving their ability to use it, what you're saying is you're investing in their success. So they took that entire upswing in capacity and they turned it into something really special for the people that use their services and their technology. And I love this story. So what does this mean for me? Well, it really means two things. If you want to be really blunt about it, it means if you've got 20 writers and you're not expecting a significant increase in output, some of them people aren't going to be writers anymore. Let's just be honest about that. Some of them have to move to other types of jobs. But the really exciting part about this is you get to choose a new scope for what is possible. Organizations that are in desktop publishing or are in wiki or whatever it is, they have a very specific set of things that are currently possible. But when you make this change, when this revolution happens, you get to choose now. You get to redefine what is possible for your organization and for your people. And I think that's a really, really exciting proposition. So this whole concept of being able to redefine not only the processes and the people and the organization, but what that organization does, to me, is one of the reasons that I love being in this industry. So how do we optimize this? Talk to your people. Again, back to the cost and the efficiency conversation. We had to go and have conversations. You have to be a little bit of a therapist when these things happen. Plan for them. Let them know what they're being redefined into. Let them decide. Ask them, do you want to go and be a content architect? This is what it does. This is the new job roles. Do you want to go into an instructional design? It's not tech writing. It's not just a different title. It actually has different job roles. And then invest in them. So you're going to find out where they want to go, who's going to do what. You have a plan for them. It's part of your implementation. It's part of your change. You got to invest in those things. You can't just change someone's title and expect they're now going to do instructional design. I see people do that. That is a super common thing. Sitting in this room, you may not think that it is, but I see that happen all the time. You've got to invest in their training. You've got to invest in their ability to redefine themselves. And finally, rethink your process. So don't try to put a new set of tools into your old process. Start from a blank piece of paper and decide what would look like a new process and get somebody else's perspective on it. This is really where consultants come in, is this rethinking of your process. Because a consultant has dealt with other processes. People who've been in an organization for a long period of time have maybe dealt with other processes, but maybe not in a long time. So I think that this is the outside advice that really can make the big difference. Have somebody else tell you what they think you should do, and then change it and make it into what you really want to do. Okay. And obviously redefine your goals. That's the exciting bullet, really. Okay, 1.5 more problems. Quality. Both of these last two are short, I promise. So there's some big opportunities in quality. You can increase your consistency. You can increase your quality through targeted content, and you can automate higher quality. So when things are automated, less mistakes. That's always a good thing. You can also automate low quality. That's a problem. So you got to be honest about the fact that when you do things more efficiently, it doesn't necessarily mean you're doing things better. So I think that it's important to separate those things out. And then, as we'll get to in a second, PDF can be a little bit of a difficult thing to deal with inside of this new paradigm. And that's up there largely because I've got a quote that I like that I'll show you in just a second. So there's really different two measures of quality. There's content and then there's output, right? So content's pretty easy. You kind of get a lot of this naturally. Reuse naturally improves quality. Or I think some people in this room that I know would probably argue that well-implemented reuse improves quality naturally. So this is one of the things that you plan for it, you do it right, and it just is going to improve your quality. Validation improves quality. And again, this is kind of an out-of-the-box thing. This is Kit. Consistency improves your quality. So you have the ability to organize people into a different form of writing. They're writing topics as opposed to long articles. You're removing prose. It's simplified. It's going to be more consistent. There are things you can do to automatically check some of these, and that's going to improve your quality. And semantics improve quality. They also open a lot of doors. Anybody who was at my automation talk yesterday, I got to show something that was fun about checking things with content. So if anybody wants to see a neat little toy that I built around content, you can stop by my booth later and I'll happily show you. But that was largely built off of semantics. So output, on the other hand, output doesn't have this like, okay, it's just going to kind of be better because we're doing it right? This is a quote. The biggest problem with getting anything to look like, you can do whatever you want with that in PDF. And this is from one of our customers as well. Now, there are so many things that I love about this quote. But the argument that I would get into and have gotten into is that I think that maybe the problem here is not so much that it doesn't look the way, or it looks bad. I think it doesn't look the way you want it to. So one of the things that I always really strongly encourage people to do when it comes to any type of print layout, any type of PDF, any static format at all, before going into this whole thing, is to think about what's really important here. Are all those specific page breakings, is the 2-column, is the exact positioning of that, is that important to me or is it important to my customer? After my customer reads it, are they more knowledgeable because it's perfectly laid out by hand in InDesign and it's flowed in really nicely and everything is exactly where it was? In some cases, it's important. I mean, I'm not saying it's not important across the board, but I'm saying that I think it's a thing you should think about. It's a thing that you should be realistic about. So this gets back to redefinition again. Maybe we need to redefine what our goal in terms of quality is for some of our outputs when we're going into it. Obviously web has this same idea, except that web is almost always just pure acceleration. You can always just do more with semantic content. Very rarely is it that anybody is going from desktop publishing into a open standard semantic format like DITA and ending up with worse web output. That's just not a case, which is why I didn't spend time on it here. So what do we do to optimize this? Those are supposed to come in one at a time. So have a well-defined reuse strategy. Reuse is one of the things that can provide a big improvement in quality. It means that you can spend more time on a piece of content because it's used in 20 places. You have 20 times as much time to spend on that particular piece of content. Create and train on a content development guide. This is one of those things that is just so obvious to so many people, and then sometimes people just don't think about it at all. You have to have a guide that talks about how you develop content, how you do it, what your standards are, language, usage of capitalization, all those types of things. This is what creates the consistency inside of a collaborative team where when things flow together, because remember we're in topics now, for those of you who are familiar with DITA, they don't sound like they were written by 30 different people. They sound like they were written by one organization. So having a content development guide and training on it is really important. And then finally, rethink your definition of quality, maybe. So, decide what it is that is high quality to you now. And I think this circles all the way back to our goals. What are our goals? When you're looking at those targets right in the beginning, and then you get to the end of the process, and someone's like, oh, I don't like the way that page breaks. You can say, well, which one of our goals is that impacting? Probably isn't. I don't know, maybe it is. If you're a magazine, you probably shouldn't be using DITA. But if you're a magazine, it probably makes a difference. Finally, this is kind of a half a problem. There isn't even really slides on this. But I think it's important to call this out. Because change is really the biggest opportunity and the biggest risk here. So how do we go about really optimizing this change? What do we think about when we're going into this to make this a really positive change? we need to respect the scale of what we're doing. That's why I started with that whole seemingly random thing about this being a revolution, because it's not just a change in your tools. It really is a big change in your business. It's a revolution. It's your own little revolution, but it is. So really respect the scale of it. Respect your people. Remember that there is a very, very large human component in this change. And those people are either going to come along with you and they're going to row with you and move in the same direction and they're going to make this awesome, or they are going to fight you if they don't understand why they're doing this. And the only difference between this is good communication and good, solid, honest targets and definitions for people when you're going through it. Be ready for some bumps. They're going to happen. Any of these processes are going to have things that come up that you don't expect. So just, be ready to roll with it. And finally, make it worth doing. This is a big thing. This is something that is worth investing in. It's worth your time. It's worth the change. And it's worth what your team is going to go through to get there. So that's really the takeaway from my perspective. This is a new day for your organization. It really is fundamentally different. And you really get to decide what kind of day this is going to be. Questions?
Thank you, Patrick.